Well, we're back to that time of year, mid-fall. We had snow flurries this morning in the air. Nothing is sticking yet. Time to light the fire, and my goal is to work on this Piedmont wagon. So in order to put it in the paint room, I've got to completely disassemble it. And it's not quite full-fledged winter project yet, but I'd like to get this out of the way so I can start those winter projects. As I was doing the restoration on this wagon, one thing I noticed on it, one, it's short, but everything on it is made to interchange right to left, and short of the front top box board that has the rain rail on it there, everything is interchangeable. So I think this was made kind of like mass production wagon kits. Just make all the parts the same, stick them all on the shelf, and then somebody can come down later and just pull parts and put wagons together. It's not a real expensively built wagon. It's made for one horse, but I guess it had its function. Well, I don't remember exactly the sequence of events, why this brake bar and hanger didn't get primed and these different iron parts for the brake didn't get primed. But they do need to get primed, so I'll probably put those in the paint room first. I'll prime these and then they can cure a bit while I sand on the wheels. The wheels I think I'll paint first. I like to paint those and then I can roll them aside gently, put the front and rear axle in, and then while they are curing or have cured after I've painted them, then I can put the wheels on those axles and makes them a little more navigable. Then I set the box in and do that. So I think that's what I'm going to do first. I need to do some light sanding on these wheels. I had done the finish sanding on them previously, but through time of sitting around, they've got some grunge and grime, and they were in the paint room for a while I did some other light painting, so there's a little bit of overspray on those. So I need to clean them up. It won't take too long, but all sanding takes time. So I have hooks on my ceiling that I take pieces of tire wire and fasten to these little hooks, and I can suspend all my little pieces like I have here. But that's really not the point because I think you've seen that before. What I want to show you is how I heat this paint room. So years and years ago, 40 plus some years ago, we bought a house that had hot water radiant heat throughout the whole system. We had a house mover come in and lift that house and move it from Billings out here to Joliet. Well, in the dismantling of that, I took out all this radiant heating and we used it in the house for a time because I had a coal-fired boiler and we heated our house with hot water. So I had some extra of this radiant heater that I accommodated into my paint room. So what I did is I built me a small water tank and I have a heating element, 220, that heats the water within this tank. And when you do hot water, you have to have an expansion system, have a pressure tank, have a circulating pump that all goes into this radiant system. And I have a constant water supply here that keeps all the air out of it. So this provides me a flameless heat source for my paint room, which works really well. And then I have an exhaust fan here that is protected by furnace filters. So all the overspray is collected into these filters before it gets into the fan and is exited outside. When I have a vehicle that is too large for this room, it is about 12 foot square. I can open up these double doors and I have built an apparatus that will completely enclose that. So I have painted vehicles that are up to 16 feet in here by doing that. It happens so seldom, but it does work when I have to. So back to the task at hand, and that's sanding. A little hydraulic table here is going to work well, and since these axles have been converted to roller bearing, I'm just going to use these for both the front axle and the rear axle to suspend these while I do the sanding. I think that'll work. That'll let me rotate the wheels while I sand them. So like I mentioned, I've already sanded these previously, so there's just kind of a surface sanding that I'm going to do to clean these up. Typically, if I'm going to paint black, I use a 400 grit paper. On this, these are going to be painted maroon, so I'm just using a 320. It's possible maybe I could use a 280. But if I was going to paint these maybe a yellow color, then 280 would be doable. This is a pretty dark maroon, so I sanded this before with 320, and I'll just lightly touch it up again. It's interesting how life kind of throws curveballs at you. When I was talking to my great aunt, back in the early 80s, she was relaying to me something about my father, and that he was raised Mennonite. She was Mennonite as well, and she was explaining some of the history of the Amish and the Mennonite. And she told me about my German father. He says, a lot of Germans are not only pretty hands-on when it comes to, a hand-eye coordination type of deal, but they tend to be pretty stoic, pretty withdrawn, the strong silent type. And as she was relaying that, she was talking specifically about my dad and says, your dad had it, but the thing about your dad was he got a double dose of it. He didn't talk a lot. He was just kind of a reserved man. He spent his time in the military, but I heard very little, if anything, about that time. Well, being the son of my father, and I heard this from my mother a time or two, you're just like your father. I started out not being very adept at public speaking. So it's always been interesting to me that through the bulk of my career here in the shop, I spent almost 30 years of that going to public auctions, and I would put a display together and actually kind of play gypsy and go sell my wares at these sales. Well, when you do that, it necessitates that you interact a lot with the public. So I found myself in a public speaking arena pretty consistently, answering questions about, well, I have this horse, I have that mule, I have this donkey, and I'm new to driving, what do I do? So I found myself in a position that I was interacting a lot with the public and doing, therefore, public speaking. And I also spent, probably 35 years in the church circles and served every capacity in that realm. And again, found myself in the public speaking arena. And lo and behold, today in the YouTube world, here this guy that doesn't really like to talk too much finds himself speaking to the camera to numerous folks like yourself. Well, when I was traveling to these shows, when my children were real young, they would come along. They started maybe 5, 6 years old, and we would camp out, go to the shows, and we traveled a lot of miles together. Well, as my older 2 sons ended up going to school, got a little older, they traveled less and less. And our daughter, which you have all met, she is a purple-haired welder and blacksmith. She's quite a character. She and I traveled countless miles together, going to sales and shows, and we would spend a lot of our time traveling at night. And she would be in the back seat. I had a Super Cab Ford, and she would be in this back seat late at night, and as little children would do, she'd say, "Dad, would you tell me a story?" So I found myself trying to come up with a story, and it got to be to where the start of all my stories were, well, way back, way before time, even before there was dirt, such and such would happen. And I'd start to spin a yarn, and we would travel miles, and she would listen to my nonsense stories, and they usually ended up involving a young girl and different adventures and what all, just kind of off the cuff. Well, there was one particular trip that we were making to southern Wyoming, about 500 miles, and we were delivering a Yellowstone Park coach that I had restored back to a museum. Well, I wanted to be there when the museum opened up, and so that necessitated that we left about dark 30. It was a 10 to 12 hour drive to get there. And it was one of those deals that we were well into it, and I heard this from the back seat, "Dad, would you tell me a story?" So I spun a yarn and made something up as we were going. Well, we got to about Douglas, and my pickup started acting up. One thing about that time back then, I typically drove Fords, and I soon learned you never left home driving a Ford without a toolbox. Well, I had spent quite quite a little bit of time mechanicking on my Fords. It's just part of the deal of what you do when you drive Fords. So we're about 2 o'clock in the morning now, and my pickup isn't running worth a hoot. And I pulled into a lit parking lot, and I could tell I wasn't getting any fuel. And I had done this before, but I opened up the fuel line and I ran a Phillips screwdriver through my filter on my carburetor to open it up. And sure enough, it was a plugged filter, and it fired up, and we headed south. They were in Douglas, headed to Cheyenne. Well, I got to about Wheatland. In fact, I had just passed the Wheatland exit. Things were going well. All of a sudden, she just died on me. I was able to get off to the side of the road, but there we were, probably 5 miles past Wheatland, and it was just coming to be daylight. And I kind of had to figure out what I'd done. When I punctured that fuel filter, I just allowed all that garbage to run into my carburetor, and I knew I had carburetor problems. But now I'm still quite a ways away from the museum. Now what do I do? Well, I'm guessing from memory that it was probably maybe 6 in the morning, and we're on the interstate and headed the other direction. A pickup stopped pulling a trailer, and he stopped, and it looks like you got problems. Yep, I'm kind of dead on the road here. Well, I got a trailer load of miniature Herefords. Let me run back and drop those off, and I'll come back and give you a tow back into town. Well, that was really kind of him, so we sat there and waited, and pretty soon he shows up and pulls my pickup, and I've got a trailer on, of course, and I've got this Yellowstone coach in the back of it, and he pulls us into Wheatland. Well, he's part of a automotive dealership in there. I don't remember if he owned it or worked for them, whatever. Gets us back in, and sure enough, she won't run. He says, well, here, take my pickup, hook it onto your trailer, and go take your coach down to the museum. No, I said, I've never even met this guy before. No, it'll be fine. You take it down there and get what you need to fix your pickup and bring it on back. I probably won't be here then. Just drop it off and set the keys above the visor, and it'll all be fine. Couldn't hardly believe total stranger would offer me his pickup, hook onto my trailer, never met before, and say, here, take my pickup and go finish what you need to do. So reluctantly, I did. I got the coach delivered, and I found a parts store, and I found a carburetor kit. Headed back, and it was, late afternoon, I suppose. The store was closed, nobody was around. And sure enough, I left the pickup there. Pickup had a flatbed on it, so I took off the carburetor, tore it all apart. If you've ever been into carburetors before, you know there's a few parts to them. Spread it all out on the flatbed of my pickup and rebuilt my carburetor there in this gravel parking lot of this car lot. And after however long it was, I don't remember, put her back together, and she fired up. I said a note of great gratitude in the pickup. Don't remember the man's name. Never seen him since. But here, a total stranger from Wyoming, good old cowboy country, saw somebody in need, opposite side of the interstate, saw I was stuck, stopped, interrupted his day, loaned us his pickup, and said, here, it'll be fine. That is the country that we live in. Doesn't happen every day. But sadly enough, those people are probably fewer and fewer between. But it taught me a great lesson to be considerate enough and mindful enough of people in trouble along the road, because there's so many times I've been there, done that, found myself mechanicking on my old pickup. So when I see somebody else that is in that spot, I'll stop and say, hey, you got a problem? Can I give you a hand? Been done to me. I'd like to do it to you. One wheel down, 3 to go. You know, it's oftentimes when I find myself doing mundane, repetitious, kind of boring jobs, I find my mind going back to events that have happened previous in all the years that I've been doing this and traveling around the country. And this was just one of those times that I thought, you know, I'll just share one of those thoughts that are going through my head as I'm doing something that's routine. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.